March. How's everybody? Good. Good. Not too bad. It was chilly this morning, right? And then we have a little bit more rain maybe in the morning. I think it canceled our softball game on Saturday. I was like, oh, we don't have to wake up at 8. What a shame, right? It rained. It was like just enough, right? Just before we went to bed Friday night. You're like, no games in the morning. I've never seen my 11-year-old so happy. She was like, yes, like doing a dance around the house. And then she has a game on Thursday. If it rains too much on Wednesday, that'll be canceled too. So I don't like, why are we signing you up for softball if you don't want to play? She's like, I like it. I just love when the games get canceled. All right. Anyway, I hope you had a good weekend. I can't believe it's March. Makes it feel like we are kind of like going very quickly through the semester. We're pretty much at the halfway point right now, actually, if you think about it. 19 days, 2 hours and 28 minutes to go. Still counting, right? Sorry, I know it's probably obnoxious, but I'm still counting. Anyway, I gave you a homework assignment. So I want to give you a few minutes to kind of discuss that with people around you. Then we'll talk about it together and then I'll collect it. So if you want to find like 2, 3, 4 people, whatever's easy around you, can compare what you came up with and share your one that you created if you have time to. So I think that's really fun practice. So I'll give you a little bit to do that, then we'll talk about it together. Yeah. Yes. I was talking about that because I think oh, let me like I think it's so much I know because like he's having recurring medical symptoms. Thanks so much.
Because it's something that's
in my childhood, my father people something
Number more equipment practitioner. Yeah. They protected
What's your
oh, keeps going down the stairs and you know, like, I mean, so it's not something. So, and I did something really similar. I'm just watching her a lot in the past years. Anytime she goes is true for aliens. So they actually last when they go to the school, she was having a lot of so the doctor said I love testing. And then I was complete up to the pen. And I said Emma has almost. Yeah. It was very. Yeah, but I was like, we've already done 2 questions. So I should do this.
Which is almost more than years.
I feel like those 2 are the ones that we like know the most about, and that are like the most like like yeah. Compared to the illnesses that I used to like actually I've seen a lot. Like I know a lot of individual illnesses. then for the Oh, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was, yeah, we're trying to do there. Great. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Did it maybe skip a row? That happens. Take a couple more minutes and I'll talk about it together.
Oh, that's it. I'm gonna get myself points.
Most of you look done when you want. So let's go through 4 together, and then I'll collect them from you. But again, these were real stories. I had to shorten them down a little bit because some of them were quite a bit longer. But these were actually cases that were like in the news and actually happened. So for some reason, that to me makes it more interesting. But how about Brian? Anyone want to talk about what you thought might be going on with Brian? Anyone have any thoughts about him? Yeah, go here.
Some pattern because he was tested and his life feeling particularly about a loved one dying and quite a bit of deals with. So
Okay. Okay, so you put the somatization patterns. Okay, did anyone put anything different? Yeah. Yeah.
He went through something traumatic, his body was symptoms.
Yeah, and I would go that way. And there's a couple of reasons. One, his physical symptom is really dramatic, right? That loss of sensation, the conversion disorder is always dramatic, right? The hysteria. The other one is he doesn't have like the sexual symptom, the neurological symptom. You have to have those 4 groups of symptoms for somatization patterns. So pretty like seems pretty clear because something happens, he converts it into a physical symptom. Nothing is actually wrong with it. How about Blanca? Any thoughts on, you want to do Blanca since you had your hand for me? Sure, and one.
She is not taking for that.
Yeah, it seems like she's like making her sick, right, for attention. And sometimes, like I mentioned before, people start to notice that pattern that when the caregiver was there, they get worse. Which could be a variety of things, but in this case, noticing that and keeping her from being able to see her, you could have put fictitious disorder, factitious disorder, or Munchausen by proxy. Remember, they're the same thing, just different names for the same thing. How about Tom? Anyone have thoughts on Tom? I heard some debating on Tom, which I like. Right, any thoughts? Yeah.
So I went with somatic symptoms.
Okay.
Characterized by like a rumination on a physical ailment and a conflated idea of the danger of that physical ailment. That then in turn leads to a worsening of the sibling ailment inside the business.
Okay.
So that was what I went for in his case, notably because when I was looking at the criteria for that, they were looking at a time frame of over 6 months, and he had had it for, this has been going on for a year. He had a conflated idea of the danger, was never quite satisfied with the doctor's statement. And because he was very like heightened fixated on this symptom.
And I love all the things you're saying. So which disorder did you pick?
Somatic symptom disorder.
Okay. I think you have all the right criteria, but there's one that fits a little bit better, right? Because remember that one, there's the 2 patterns, right? There's the somatization pattern and then the predominantly pain pattern. I don't think the pain one fits him, and he doesn't have a sexual or neurological symptom.
Okay.
But you pointed out all the right things. Did somebody have something different? Yeah. Yeah, and so all the stuff that you said actually fits that like really well, like you had it just around, you can go ahead and change it, it's totally fine. But yeah, he's obsessed with his health, right? And for good reason, right? If somebody in your life had cancer, right, that was close to you, like it might instill more fear. So the fact that he is going and he's not happy with the diagnoses and all those things, definitely points to like illness, anxiety disorder, right? You had all the right stuff right there. There's one more person, Leslie, right, on the next page. What do we think for number 4? Anyone have thoughts on Leslie? I want to call her Kim. Anybody? Last one? Thank you.
I believe that Leslie has Mundell syndrome because she faked her entire pregnancy just to like gain sympathy.
Yeah.
And when that pregnancy eventually fails.
Yeah, that Munchausen's or factitious disorder, either one will work. Yeah, she fixed the whole thing for attention, right? And I think I shared with you, right, that Kim did that and we threw her a baby shower and everything. And so this was an actual story in the news. Some of these are a little older, obviously, I had to go back to find them. But yeah, she faked the whole thing to get attention.
We're putting 1,000 for as well.
For yeah. So if you put it, it would be by proxy because they were doing it to someone else, but yes, or you could have put factitious disorder. I look forward to reading your number 5 that you have created. That's always fun to me. So hopefully this was kind of a nice way to review. If you want to make sure your name is on there and pass them forward, I'll take them from you and we'll keep going. All right, so we have a little bit left of this chapter just to finish up, and then we'll move on to mood disorders. We also we should have a guest speaker on Wednesday. They've been kind of going back and forth with me. At worst case, it'll be Monday. But Wednesday, hopefully we can kind of start talking a little bit about depression today. And then we have someone coming in to talk about QPR and suicide prevention, as I mentioned before, which you get a little certificate for being part of. And she usually brings little like gifts too, like little stress sticks that we can, my kids like to beat each other with them. They're awful. They're like these really cool little bendable sticks, but my kids use them as weapons. So hopefully they'll be here Wednesday. If not, it'll be Monday. But let's finish up this chapter. There's kind of a couple other pieces. We talked about all the different disorders that we have here. And remember, just if I go back, conversion disorder, somatic symptom disorder with the 2 patterns, and then factitious disorder or Munchausen's, and illness anxiety, right? All of them kind of being related to symptoms affecting your body that are being driven by or misinterpreted related to like psychological factors. So in terms of causes and treatment, and I feel like we kind of talked about this along the way, these are very trauma and stress related, which is why I covered them after that trauma and stress unit. They tend to have a lot of like behavioral and cognitive explanations. People don't have a better way of getting attention, so they fake it because that's the only way that they know how. Or they've been rewarded for doing certain like behaviors, and so they continue to do them. Or maybe they don't know how to cope with a trauma, and so it gets converted into something physical as a way of them trying to cope with it or bring attention to it in some way. So the essence is that it's either like trauma or stress related, or maybe some kind of like conditioning has taken place, or those are the only ways that they know how to get attention, right? Those are very kind of common elements, things that happen in their life driving them. And in terms of treatment, it obviously depends on which of the disorders, but oftentimes what you see within this group is there's a lot of seeking multiple opinions. Like you go to one doctor and maybe they don't see the whole picture, so you have to go to another doctor and another, or you're convinced you have something you don't have, so you keep going from doctor to find that right diagnosis. People don't tend to go to therapy for these disorders because they might not realize that it's a psychological issue. right? They might not realize that they're having headaches and stomach aches or pain due to something like in their mind rather than in their body. So it doesn't tend to be the first resort. It actually tends to be like the last resort most of the time when things don't present in the way that we would expect. There are some things like medications that we can do. Therapy to find the root of it is a big one, right? So kind of going back, when was the first time that you were rewarded for pretending to be sick? When was the first time that you felt anxiety about your health, right? And kind of going back and trying to figure that out. I'm convinced that my daughter Paisley is going to have illness anxiety disorder. It's like almost comical at this point. Like we were talking about, of course, we were talking about the cruise. Every single time we've gone on a cruise, this will be number 4, right? So 3 cruises. She always gets really, really sick the first night. Always. And not like a little sick. It's like 2 a.m, awful. Like on the last one, she had like a huge potty accident. She's 9, by the way, all over the floor, like the toilet's here and she decided to go here. And you're like, what were you doing? It took us like 3 hours to clean it up at 2 a.m. The 2 before that, she threw up. She always convinces herself that she's sick on these cruises. So I've been bribing her for like days. I'm like, I'll tell you what do you want? If you don't throw up or get sick, what do you want? Right? This kid, I swear she will be here. Like, and I don't know if it's anxiety or stress or whatever, it just gets in her mind. But with a lot of these, it's trying to figure out, where did that start? When did you first start doing this? And how can we find better ways to manage that anxiety or get you the attention that you feel like you need? The treatment can be a little difficult because you have to realize you're doing it before you can fix it. Hopefully not this time. And I'm really hoping she doesn't ruin their room this time around. We'll see. I'll let you know, I'm sure. On the other side of this chapter, there are some things that are super common. Very, 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 very common things that tend to be kind of an interplay between stress and physical stuff, right? These have a physical element to them in addition to a stress element. People can get what are called psychophysiological or psychosomatic disorders, where it's an interaction of things together. And again, these are ridiculously common, things like insomnia, difficulty falling asleep. When you're stressed out, it is so hard to get a good night of sleep. I felt like when COVID hit, I didn't sleep anymore because I was always anxious and I didn't know what was happening. And I had a really hard time sleeping because of anxiety and stress. Migraines. Anyone here get migraines or like TMJ related like pain? Like lots of you, they tend to be very directly connected to stress. Asthma, high blood pressure, heart disease. There's a bunch of different things up here that tend to be very connected to stress. When we're stressed out, we get headaches, we get stomach aches, we have a hard time sleeping, and it can cause us to have a lot of tension, which leads to a bunch of different types of headaches as well. So again, these are really, really common, and some people tend to be more vulnerable to them, right? When we talk about these physical stress disorders, sometimes like your personality style plays a role, right? Every single one of us, and this is a very oversimplified like study, which I'll mention here in a moment, but there was a research done like back in, I believe it was the 70s, and it was done by a tobacco company, and it had a lot of like questionable like psychometric methods. But they came up with this idea that your personality style can directly affect your health and levels of stress. There's truth to that, but not necessarily the findings of the study. And so what we see is that people who tend to be more like hard-driven, competitive, ambitious, always on the go, like more type A, tend to have higher levels of like stress, higher blood pressure, and so on, rather than people who are like more mellow, right? So there's the like, I'm going to climb the mountain as fast as I can, and it's a race to the top because it's there. Or like, I could today, it's not going anywhere. Like I have plenty of time because it's there. And there's a type C and D and E, and nobody is like one or the other. But the takeaway of this study was that your personality and the way that you cope with things around you can directly impact your experience of stress, right? And there is a very high correlation between those two. There's also a very strong correlation between stress and health, right? When we are stressed out, we are so much more likely to get sick. Maybe not right away, but it could be like right after an event has passed or something like that. Very common during finals week or during like the holidays, everybody's coughing and sniffling, right? Because our immune systems are low because we're stressed out. Right? There's a whole field called psychoneuroimmunology, or PNI for short. And this field looks at the connection between stress and the immune system, because we know that the immune system, which fights off and destroys bacteria and viruses and cancer cells and so on, is compromised when we're stressed. All that energy that could go to fighting those things off instead is going to stress. So there's a lot of ways that stress can actually impact us. I think most of us tend to have that like, oh, I'm stressed, whatever, it's not a big deal. But over long periods of time, stress can actually be very damaging to our body, right? It can be very harmful in the long run. And it can make us more likely to be sick. In terms of treatments and things we can do, there is a whole like division called behavioral medicine, which looks at interventions to help with some of these things, especially these physical disorders that we just talked about. And there's a ton of things you can do to help, right? I don't know if any of you use like the Calm app, really cool app. It's like free for like the basic stuff, and then you can add on if you wanted to. But the Calm app is a wonderful, and there's a bunch of them as well. Headspace is another really good one. But there's a bunch of like great apps that have like soundscapes and sleep stories and like meditations and things on there. People use a lot of things like aromatherapy, right? Lighting candles or using scents to calm them down. Mindfulness is another really, really big one. Just like self-care, mindfulness is one that people are focusing on a lot. Being present in the moment and really like focusing on the moment. There's things like hypnosis, meditation, biofeedback. You can attach instruments to see where you're holding tension in your body and then work on calming those areas down. But all of these center around like interventions or ways that you're trying to reduce stress by finding ways to calm down. If you can calm down your mind, you calm down your body. And if you can calm down your body, you calm down your mind. Right? So whether that's going on a walk or doing something fun or doing something more formal, it's important to find ways to calm down and reduce that stress so it doesn't have long-term effects on your system. I like to do these like guided relaxation trainings. I don't know if anybody likes to do them, like these guided visualization things. I've learned though recently, this is a total side note. I don't know if any of you have heard of like the PrEP program. There's like this research program that we have on our campus, which is picking up again in the fall if you wanted to do it. I've been an advisor. I've had a few interns in it, but I had somebody like 2 years ago who was doing a research study on something called aphantasia. And I don't know if any of you have heard of aphantasia. It's really rare, but I found out that I have it and I didn't know it. My whole life, I didn't know that I have this, where you can't picture things in your mind. For me, it's people, right? Like I recognize your faces, but if you ask me to close my eyes and picture you, I can't. I have been with my partner for 20 years. If I close my eyes and try to picture my partner, all I can picture are photographs. Like I can't picture her as she is. I'll picture like her image that's on my phone when she calls me, or the last picture I took of her. Same with my kids, right? So I'm not great at visualization. I've learned, especially with people, but total random side note, but I didn't know what aphantasia was. And so I'm sharing that with you in case that's relevant to you as well. But I do have a bunch of these really kind of cool relaxation trainings. I have one, it's one of my favorites. It's like 9 minutes. Is anyone interested in doing that? I got one nod. That's all I needed, right? One nod. If I got two, even better, right? So obviously these desks in this situation isn't the most relaxing, but try to get as comfortable as you can. It's about 9 minutes. There's nothing to look at. It's just audio, but it's like a guided visualization through the forest. And I think I like it because it's a forest and it's very peaceful. But they'll have you try to like imagine walking through like a calm, peaceful forest and try to relax your body. Don't fall asleep. Stay with me, right? I'll turn off the lights. Did you have a question? Yeah, you just focus on like, so it's a spectrum, so it's pretty rare to not be able to see
I guess.
anything at all. So you have anything else? Interesting. So just what you could do is focus on just like what she's saying. and the feelings that might come from it or any associations that you have with it. Right, so I struggle really badly to picture anything that she says, right? But there's one point where she says, picture a red falling leaf, and for some reason I can picture that. But like the rest of it, no. Yeah. Interesting, right? So yeah, again, a whole spectrum, like I can picture inanimate things, but not people, right? Super interesting, it's pretty rare, and it's really uncommon to have it all the way. So just, kind of listen to what she's saying and, any associations that you have with it. That's what I do anyway. So do your best. I'll turn off the lights, but try not to fall asleep. You get so relaxed. You're like, I'm ready to sleep. But I think this is a really, nice one. Sometimes I think it's hard to find like ones that are good, but I like this one. So I'll play it for you. As I said, it's about 9.5 minutes. All right. And they'll ask you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing that. Please feel free. And if not, do what you're comfortable doing.
Guided imagery is a powerful relaxation technique. In this exercise, you will be guided into a beautiful, tranquil forest. As your imagination is guided through various sensory suggestions, your body and mind will respond as though what you are imagining is real. So if you are feeling tense or stressed, this will help shift your mood to one of peace and relaxation. So begin by finding a comfortable place to relax and make sure you're warm. Placing yourself into a nice, comfortable position, either sitting or lying down on a bed, couch, or the floor. And when you're ready, close your eyes. Begin by taking a nice, slow, deep breath, deep into the belly. Hold the breath for a brief moment and release the breath. Once again, nice deep breath in, hold, and now release. As you release the breath, let go of any tension, surrendering the weight of your body onto the surface that you're lying on. One last time, deep breath in, hold, and now exhale. Feel yourself beginning to relax and let go. Now imagine you're walking along a path in a beautiful, secluded forest on a bright, sunny autumn morning. The path is soft underneath your shoes. You can hear each of your footsteps against the forest floor, where there are fallen leaves, pine needles, twigs, and moss. As you walk along the path, you can feel a gentle, cool breeze caressing your cheeks. You hear the birds singing and the leaves of the trees as they rustle in the wind. As you continue to walk, you feel relaxed and your mind clears more and more with each step you take. The fresh air is revitalizing as you take a nice deep breath in and as you continue to walk through the forest. You notice the tall trees around you. The red and golden leaves look magnificent, and you stop for a moment to take in this beautiful scenery around you. You notice a red leaf falling from a tree as it dances and twirls in the air before slowly fluttering down to rest along with the others. In the distance, you hear the babbling of a stream. As you look ahead, you notice the sun dappling through the trees, and you see the sun reflection upon the gurgling stream that runs along the edge of the forest. You continue to tread carefully into the forest, over the crackling red and golden leaves, and the broken twigs and pine cones that are scattered across the ground. It is very peaceful here, and the deeper you venture into the forest, the deeper into relaxation you fall, and you're filled with a deep sense of peace and tranquility. You pause a while and rest against an old oak tree, and you feel the rough bark of the tree against your fingers. You look down and you notice a patch of soft green moss that covers a smooth, large rock, and its lushness invites you to sit down for a while. The tree welcomes you to lean against its bark so that you feel comfortable. While sitting quietly beneath this oak tree, you enjoy the peace and stillness. You feel nourished by the warmth of the sun on your body, and you feel a deep connection to all that is around you. You feel the warmth of the sun soothing and relaxing your head, your back, your shoulders, arms, and legs. Your whole body is peaceful and relaxed. Take a few moments and enjoy this deep sense of peace and relaxation. Now bring your awareness back to where you're sitting beneath the oak tree and see yourself slowly standing up. You brush off any leaves or moss that may be on your clothes You take a final look at the beautiful scenery around you. And when you're ready, follow the trail back as you proceed to leave the forest. Now bring your awareness back to the room. Become aware of the surface beneath you. Notice the sounds in the room. Feel yourself awaken. And when you're ready, open your eyes, feeling refreshed, alert, relaxed.
All right. So I know not the easiest thing to do in a classroom surrounded by people you don't know, right? And in chairs that are so comfortable, right? But hopefully at some point you were able to kind of give into it a little bit. I always feel like I'm fighting it for like a few minutes. Like for the first few minutes, I'm thinking about like the other stuff that I need to do that feels more important, right? Other thoughts are popping into my head. And then eventually I feel like I kind of settle into it. But then any little movement will bring me out of it, right? But I don't know, does that make you feel better? You feel sleepy? Like any, like better? Hopefully not worse. I feel worse. I hate forests, right? Yeah.
The beach, you cannot keep up.
Yeah.
It's just like picturing one thing and then like you live in the cross and you come back.
Uh-huh.
You really never thought to.
Right. And
Okay, yeah.
that doesn't help, right? And at least you kept trying to come back, right? And the more you do these, the better and easier they get. But it can be so challenging, just attention-wise in general, but especially if you add like an ADHD element to it. Yeah.
Similar introvert is if I was able to follow it, but because my mind is always like racing to some degree,
Yeah.
the perspective was constantly shifting. The first person and the third person, like the detail was surrounding it. Like I couldn't keep a continuous
Yeah.
episodic, like I'm actually there imagination. It was still very good. I'm not sure if you're supposed to do that. I'm not sure if the human mind is built to do that.
Right.
But
You can get there, but it takes practice to get. Right, I would say it is probably really normal. If you ever had a moment during this where you like checked out and came back and checked out and came back, that's totally normal. It's hard to hold on to it all the way through, right? Especially if you can't see it, right? Like I can't picture it except for like the leaf part, but like the music is peaceful and like the idea of it is peaceful. And that's just kind of the idea behind some of these things. A lot of them are like trying to find ways to calm yourself down. You can also do things like grounding. I don't know if anyone practices that, but grounding could be something that's much faster too, or like bringing your attention to the moment, like focusing on a couple of sounds that you hear, or a couple of things that you feel or smell. I had somebody in college, I saw it in a classroom. There was this person had a poster that said, the time to relax is when you don't have time for it. And I was always like, that's so obnoxious, right? Because it's so true, but it's so like obnoxious at the same time. When you're the most stressed out, that's when these things become the most important. And so if you can kind of build them into your life a little bit, whether it's, you know, working out and you find relaxation in that, or like breathing or yoga or any of these kind of things up here, they can be really helpful for calming your system down, which can go a long way to fighting stress and so on. But hopefully I didn't make you too sleepy at all. But again, there's some really cool apps, lots of like free relaxations online, and they tend to be, I think, kind of helpful. So I don't know, any other thoughts, comments, questions, anything else related to this chapter at all before we move on from it? We'll say goodbye to it. Okay. Our next chapter then, if we close this. I see my background, I have a forest, right? Not that I like the forest at all, right? But here we go. So from here, where we'll go is we'll talk about mood disorders. And so anxiety disorders are the most common disorders by far. Mood disorders are number two, right? Mood disorders are very common. A lot of people struggle with things like depression, bipolar disorder, a lot of the things that are in this chapter. So we'll talk a little bit about what are some of the main ones and their symptoms and so on. And then we'll build on that in chapter 7 by talking about suicidality, which is very commonly correlated here. And our guest speaker will be covering that, which again, hopefully will be on Wednesday. So when we talk about mood disorders, we're talking about emotional extremes. Every single one of us is going to experience fluctuations in mood. That's normal, right? Like you have a good day, your mood's going to be high. A bad day, your mood's going to be low. And then a lot of time in just kind of like the middle, right? It's very normal to have changes in your mood. It would be abnormal if you didn't respond to the world around you. We could think about mood as a spectrum, right? With two endpoints or two poles, as we sometimes call them. There's the low end of mood and the high end of mood. The extreme low, we could call depression. And the extreme high, we could call mania. And then all of this in here is kind of like normal, or we could say typical mood. And again, you're going to kind of go back and forth, right? You're going to have days where maybe you're a little more up or a little more down, but most of us spend our time kind of in here. Right? Depression, and we'll talk about these much more. I'm just kind of introducing them here. But depression is that low, sad state, the extreme low, very different from just being sad. It's got a lot of like lack of energy and low self-worth. We'll look at those symptoms in just a moment. And mania is the extreme other end of people like not sleeping, being very up and agitated and frenzied, oftentimes like very like reckless, impulsive behavior. And people can have one or the other. If they have both, we call that bipolar disorder. And we'll talk about this later, but there are two types, 1 and 2. But bipolar disorder is when you have the low and the high. You have both poles. 2 poles is what bipolar means. It used to be called manic depression. Makes sense, right? Mania and depression. But then we coined a different type of mania called hypomania. So we changed it to bipolar and added a couple of types. But we'll talk about all of that as we go through. But know that there are 2 kind of extreme ends and a lot of stuff in the middle. And again, most of us live here, kind of in that normal, typical range. Someone who has a mood disorder has extreme low or extreme high, or maybe it lasts quite a bit longer than they would like it to. It's affecting their life in some way. And as I mentioned, these are unfortunately quite common. How many of you know someone who's either struggled with depression or bipolar or manic episodes or something like that? Just by show of hands. A lot of you, again, very common disorders, unfortunately. So what we'll do is we'll start with the low, and we'll talk about depression first. And then next time, if we don't have the speaker or the one after that, we'll talk about bipolar disorder and the other elements. So unipolar or major depression is when you only have the one pole, right? So unipolar means one pole. So this is somebody who just has depression with no history of mania. And as a side note, this can happen where somebody has depression and you diagnose them with depression, and then out of nowhere they have a manic episode and their diagnosis changes. That happens, right? But typically just depression, we would put them with major or unipolar depression. Can you erase this? A lot of you raised your hand. Anyone, people in your life who have depression? Any like stories or comments on people who struggle with the low side? We'll obviously talk about the symptoms, but any like comments or stories about people in your life with depression, yourself or others? Yeah.
I've had friends with depression in the past. It was difficult at times because me having my own mentor, I very much wanted to make them feel better, to try
Sure.
to pump them up and encourage them.
Mm-hmm.
And persistently trying to do that would become exhausting when they're in a state where they're so it's not something that I have the power to change by just speaking positive words, which was really confusing to me at the time.
Yeah. It's hard when you want to make it better for somebody and you can't just snap them out of it, right? It's tough. That is tough for sure, right? I've had a lot of people in my life with depression, and you want to just be like, just stop. It's okay. Like, just shake it off. And it doesn't really always work that way, right? It's frustrating. Anybody else? Any other thoughts or comments for now? Yeah.
really depressed, she's really open about it. But then she's not diagnosed or anything, but then I'm like, okay, so she's openly saying she's depressed, so like, I'm gonna help her out, and like, later she was like basically have mania, I guess, and then, it would like make me think like, oh, is she actually depressed this, and she's like, truly not, like, low and sad,
Uh-huh.
but then like, I don't wanna say she's bipolar, but I feel like she could be suffering from it, but I don't know, just cause like, I think the nursing thing is a very big, stressor for her, which makes her switch what she's on.
Sure.
I'm not totally sure.
If it's bipolar or depression or,
Yeah,
Mhm.
she really told me she used to, so I'm like, okay, but she never really says that.
Mhm.
So it's kind of.
Yeah. And when people do have bipolar, it tends to be something that is relatively like noticeable in the sense that it tends to be like extreme changes, right? Almost like two different people. But they could have what's called a hypomanic episode, which we'll talk about next time, where it's not so severe and it might be easy to miss, right? So it's tough. It could be one or the other, or it could be both, and it can change for people. Sometimes people will have depression for years with no manic anything, and then all of a sudden they have a manic episode, whether it's stress or anxiety or was just lying dormant, and then their diagnosis would change, right?
I think that was one of her like high moments where she's like is super general about everything.
Yeah.
And then she was like super alone with me, so I'm just like left like really confused.
Mhm. Right, tell her, I need a diagnosis, right? You'll be diagnosing her as you go through, right? Trying to figure it out. It's tough. Depression. I once went to a guest speaker, was at a conference, and it stuck with me. They described depression as the anguish of grief mixed with the sluggishness of jet lag. Right. And I thought that was a good description for depression, right? You're worn out and exhausted and tired and sluggish without doing anything. Right. And then you have this like anguish and pain, which can feel a lot like grief, right? Or that level of severity. It's more than being sad, right? But again, like anything else that's on a spectrum, there are quite a few symptoms that people can show to qualify for being depressed. So the way that they do it in this unit, it's a little confusing, but in order to be diagnosed with major or unipolar depression, you have to have had a major depressive episode. So the way that they break it up is that we have depressive episodes and manic episodes. And so having these episodes qualify you for the diagnosis of depression or bipolar disorder accordingly. So the criteria for a major depressive episode is what we'll look at in order to have an episode which will qualify you for depression. So you have to have 5 or more symptoms lasting for at least 2 weeks. Now, for some people, this can be years, right? And so sometimes we actually diagnose, is this continuous and ongoing, or is it a specific episode? Because for some people, this can last months or years, but it has to last at least 2 weeks, right? More often than not during a 2-week period. So some of the things that people experience, and there's a lot of them: weight loss or weight gain. Interesting with depression, it can go either way. When people are depressed, sometimes they eat and eat and eat their emotions, and they eat to try and fill a hole. They eat to try and feel better, and they gain weight. Or it can be, I don't even have the motivation or care to eat, and they barely eat at all and they lose weight. It can go either way. So either weight loss or weight gain, typically due to like your emotional like struggles. There's a diminished interest or pleasure in a diminished interest in pleasurable activities. Things that brought you joy and happiness and that you've always enjoyed doing, you just don't want to do them anymore, right? You don't have as much joy or interest in doing them. You always love to hang out with your friends. You just can't find the motivation to go do it. You love to go on walks. You just don't care to like get up and do it, right? You stop doing the things that you enjoy because you're too depressed to motivate yourself to do it. I feel like I'm starting to sound like a Cymbalta commercial or something like that, right? No, we'll talk about commercials and antidepressants later, but very common that you aren't interested in the things that have brought you pleasure. There's often insomnia or hypersomnia. Insomnia, we just talked about a little bit, is when you have a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep. So maybe you have a really hard time falling asleep at night, or you wake up throughout the course of the evening, or you wake up early when you didn't want to. Insomnia is difficulty sleeping. Hypersomnia is when somebody sleeps too much. You can't get them up. They just want to sleep the whole day away. It can be that way with depression as well, where people just don't want to get out of bed. They don't have the energy or drive to do anything. So insomnia or hypersomnia. There's a fatigue or loss of energy. You're wiped out and tired and exhausted, despite maybe doing nothing, right? It's all emotionally driven. So you tend to be exhausted and tired and wiped out. There's a lot of feelings of worthlessness or guilt. I'm worthless. I feel so bad that I'm affecting the people around me. There's no hope for the future. I can't do anything right. Hopelessness is like the #1 correlator with suicidality. When people feel hopeless, like things are never going to get better, that tends to push them toward like considering, things like ending their life, or is it worth living? We get a lot of like reduced ability to think. Like think clearly or concentrate. It's like a fog rolls in your mind. It makes it hard to remember things. It makes it hard to make decisions. It makes it hard to think clearly, to focus, to concentrate, right? It can make it very difficult to do some of those things. There's often like thoughts of death or suicide. And relatively rare, but one other one that we can sometimes get is something called psychomotor agitation. We see this a lot with mania. When someone has psychomotor agitation, it's like they constantly tapping and moving or pacing or like ringing at things. It's really common with like ADHD and also with manic episodes, but it can sometimes manifest in depression as well. People sometimes will like wring their hands repeatedly, or like pull on a collar repeatedly, or maybe on their hair. It could be putting a sweatshirt on and off over and over again. It's kind of like a repetitive behavior that's relatively mindless. And sometimes it might have to do with anxiety. Other times it's like a coping mechanism for depression. Not the most common, but it can sometimes manifest. And if somebody has 5 or more of these symptoms that interfere with their ability to function and live their life, they're causing that significant distress or impairment for at least 2 weeks, then we diagnose them with a manic or a major depressive episode, which qualifies them for major or unipolar depression. Any like thoughts or questions or thoughts, anything related to that, or anything about depressive symptoms, depressive episodes? I have an example for you that I've been booed for. I've literally been booed for this one, but I'm going to play it anyway. I don't mind. One, I think, really good example. And if you have a better one, please send it to me. I would love it. We have time to watch it like 6 times. I'm just kidding. I'll only play it once, but I want to play you an example of someone who's like, clearly love it or hate it, right? What's great about that is it shows her really struggling with a lot of these signs of depression. She's definitely having depression as a result of a circumstance here. It can be a result of circumstance. It can be a result of like chemistry, a lot of different factors, which we'll talk about. But you see a lot of stuff, right? She's definitely like not eating, right? Which leads to weight loss. She's not hanging out with friends or doing things that brought her joy. Her sleep is incredibly disrupted. We established time frame. Somebody a few years ago, it's really interesting, said that her emails were almost like a form of psychomotor agitation. Like she's mindlessly writing emails that aren't going anywhere, which I thought was kind of interesting. Thoughts of death and suicide, but you see a lot of that in her character. And we definitely established that time frame in the beginning with her kind of spinning there. But this can be something that really impacts your life. It makes it difficult to function, difficult to snap out of. and just kind of carry on with the things you would normally do. So if you have all of these symptoms, then you have unipolar or major depression. There's also kind of an interesting like side disorder that sometimes we will reference, persistent depressive disorder, PDD, or dysthymic disorder. Dysthymia is Greek for melancholy, right? So this is somebody who's like chronically sad, but on a lesser level. So persistent depressive disorder is when people have all of this stuff happening on like a lower level for 2 years or more, right? Very easy to miss. It almost might just be mistaken for personality, but there are people who have like chronic low-grade depression, or you might have like severe depressive episodes, or it could be something that's kind of ongoing and continuous, right? So it can manifest in a couple of different ways. Any other like comments or thoughts or stories and people in your life with depression or questions or anything else here before we keep going? Yeah.
I also like the anxiety, ADHD, and BPD.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
Which is a lot. Yeah.
it's a lot to deal with. They always feel like they're skyrocketing between their extremes.
Yeah.
But when they're in a depressive episode, they'll often not even take care of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and then they won't sleep as much. And sometimes it'll like skyrocket into like bleeding from there.
Sure.
Because I feel like I heard that lack of sleep can sometimes lead to hypermood.
Yeah.
So like they're always like being rocketed around.
Yeah.
And then like if they split or something, they fall deep into a deep depression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then like they don't know what to eat ever because they don't know what they feel like because they have ADHD. So then it's like a constant thing for them.
Yeah. That's not so difficult, right? I mean, and even one disorder by itself can be hard. And then people oftentimes will have like clusters of stuff going on. And sometimes it's hard when people have a bunch of different disorders. Like, is it all the same stuff, just like not manifesting clearly, or is it distinctly different things?
Yeah.
Like, not
You don't know
uncommon.
either.
Yeah.
You don't know what's causing it.
Right. It can be really difficult to know and how to treat it because you have so many things happening. And so something like borderline personality disorder, BPD, can very easily lead to depression. Like those two kind of correlate very frequently, but then adding some of the other stuff on top of it. I mean, yeah, just how challenging to deal with all that, right? It's a lot happening for sure. Anybody else? Anything else here? Let's look at some explanations for depression. There are a lot of biological things here, a lot of biological contributors to why people develop unipolar or like major depression. And one of them is it's somewhat genetic, right? It runs in families, right? If you have a biological parent who has depression, you are 27% more likely than the average person to have it. So you're not doomed to get it by any means, right? It's not like it's going to happen. It just makes you more likely to have it than the average person would be. So there is a little bit of a genetic component. There's thought that maybe there's a gene that's responsible for the transport of serotonin. That might be a culprit. We haven't discovered that yet, but it's one of the theories that's on the horizon. But beyond genetics, there are two big ones. The second one down here is really like newer and it's gaining so much popularity, but like biochemical factors are a big one when it comes to depression. When people are struggling with depression, they have a lot of issues with norepinephrine and serotonin, sometimes dopamine as well, but the two biggest ones are norepinephrine and serotonin by a mile. And so what happens is when people are depressed, they don't have enough serotonin in their system to boost mood. And so there's lots of medications that they can take, which we'll talk about probably next time, which will increase serotonin for you, or maybe later today, sorry, depending. But very common like correlations with low serotonin, low norepinephrine, and low dopamine. If people don't have enough of those, it's thought to be a major culprit in causing depression. Now, the one that's a super intriguing and has really gained so much like popularity and traction, it's also like influencing a lot of the treatments for depression, is maybe like 15, 20 years ago, we started to develop this idea that there was a brain circuit involved in depression. A brain circuit is a cluster or like network of brain structures. So a couple of different structures in the brain that work together, almost like triggering each other to create the perfect storm creating a particular kind of reaction. And so we have discovered a brain circuit for depression, that there are a couple of different parts of the brain that when not functioning properly can kind of cascade with each other to create depression and create issues. Interesting then that drives treatments like stimulation method treatments, which we'll talk more about. But with this, we see that in this brain circuit, there are a couple of different brain structures within this circuit for depression. One of them is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is in charge of memory. I always picture like a hippo strutting down campus, or down Radar Walk, whatever helps you remember. That was my hippo strut. But whatever helps you remember things. But a hippocampus is a part that's in charge of memory. That's one structure that's thought to be involved. It's very like low level of activity, which is thought to be why people struggle mentally when they're depressed. The really big one is the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, or the frontal cortex of the brain, is in charge of a lot of like our decision making, judgment, thinking clearly, personality, things like that. So it's thought that the prefrontal cortex has really low levels of activity, really low blood flow. And so that's not helping, it's contributing as well. The amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain that's in charge of emotional reactions to stimuli. So it's actually thought to be quite overactive. So people are more emotional because the amygdala is reacting stronger. And then one last region, which I have up here, Brodmann area 25. Spell it out. There's a tiny little part of the brain called Brodmann area 25 that is thought to be in charge of serotonin, right? And the production and release of serotonin. And so it's thought that this part of the brain is really undersized, really like not active enough, which is why people with depression don't have enough serotonin. And so what happens is all of these structures are kind of piggybacking off of each other in a way where they create depression, right? You have low activity in the frontal lobe, high activity in the amygdala, and so on. And so all of these networked structures like work together to create a depressive like outcome. And we can use that to help treat it, which we'll talk about probably, I would assume next time. But one of the most common biological treatments for depression is medication. Because there are so many, there's a lot of these different drugs, but it's so much thought to be the culprit of like serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine. We have a lot of different medications that we can use to try and help people who are struggling with depression. And these are called antidepressant drugs because they fight depression. These are medications that are used to alleviate mood disorders like major depression, dysthymia, or that like long ongoing form of depression. Sometimes they're used for anxiety and other things as well. But as a group, there are 4 main types of antidepressants. And I have a little video that introduces them, trying to decide. I think what I'll do, I think I'll stop there because otherwise I'll get halfway through it and that'll just be obnoxious. So maybe we'll stop here. When I see you next, we'll watch the little video that introduces these. We'll talk about the different types and the medications within each category and the side effects of them, which can be very, very difficult. So we'll stop there. And as I mentioned, just to kind of put it in your mind again, I think we are having our guest speaker on Wednesday related to suicide prevention. I know that's a difficult topic, but I know a lot of you probably have people in your life that you know who have either attempted or maybe like completed suicide. Please try and come and be here if you can. If at any point it's too much, you're always going to be welcome to step out. I will probably follow you to make sure you're okay. But you're welcome to step out if you need to, but please try and be here. I think it's really great information. They keep it very academic and they're trying to teach you how to save a life, right? How to intervene and be helpful, and you get a little certificate for being part of it. So again, I'll stop there. If you have any like questions or thoughts or anything, I'll hang out up here for a few minutes and then I'll see you on Wednesday.
Thank you so much.